The timing is certainly a surprise, but I think it's the kind of accumulative effect of so many resignations, so much churn within Zelensky's administration over the past several months.
George Grylls in Ukraine has been looking into this for the Times. The head of Ukraine's reconstruction agency, this is Mustafa Nayyem, has resigned. So, George, who is he, and how much of a blow is his departure for Zelensky?
He is the head of the Ukrainian Reconstruction Agency, but he's more than that. He's also a fairly prominent and well-known figure in Ukraine, primarily because it was he who called people to Maidan Square in 2013, and some would argue, triggered the protest that eventually led to the toppling of Viktor Yanukovych. So as well as being a politician, he's also a pretty well-known figure. The blow that this represents to Zelensky is kind of made more so because of the timing of his resignation. So the timing came on the eve of this reconstruction conference in Berlin, where Ukraine is sort of trying to convince Western countries to pledge money to fund the reconstruction, particularly of its energy infrastructure, which has been particularly badly hit over the last few months. Now, obviously, to have the head of your reconstruction agency resign just before that international conference, is not the best way to kind of convince investors that their money's going to be spent wisely.
So, how much of a surprise is this then?
I think the timing is certainly a surprise, but I think it's the kind of accumulative effect of so many resignations, so much churn within Zelensky's administration over the past several months. The Minister for Infrastructure, Alexander Kubrakov, who was also a kind of ally of Nayyem's, he was also sort of fired a couple of months ago. But most notably was the kind of the sacking of Valery Zaluzhny at the beginning of the year. He was Ukraine's top general, probably the most popular and second most recognizable person in Ukraine after Zelensky. He was sacked and replaced by Alexander Syrsky, and Zaluzhny was moved to London to become the ambassador there. So within the past few months, Nayyem's departure comes within a pattern of a lot of change within Zelensky's administration, and meanwhile more and more questions being raised about the aides who have clung on, and chiefly among them is Andriy Yermak, who is the head of Zelensky's office, really.
On another subject, George, I know you've been to the last open border crossing with Russia for the Times. Ukrainians rushing to escape occupation. What was it like?
That's right. So across over 1,000 miles of front line, there is artillery exchanges, drones, glide bombs, all along there, except for this very narrow strip in Sumy Oblast, which is a region sort of in the northeast of Ukraine. And that is the only way in which Ukrainians living in occupied parts of their country can flee through this kind of extraordinary trek that takes them through Russia and then back through Ukraine. But the final stretch to get to Ukraine, they actually have to walk. And you often find that speaking to the volunteers who are working there, you often find sort of elderly people and disabled people are kind of dumped on the Ukrainian side of the border and sort of expected to walk 1.8 kilometers. So it's a quite extraordinary tale of how these people sort of managed to go back. Over 30,000 have made use of this kind of last humanitarian corridor that presents a kind of window of escape for those living in occupied Ukraine.
And what's it actually like there to actually see it and see that final bit of frontier that's actually open between Ukraine and the Russian occupied areas?
Well, it's obviously a very sensitive place, so you can't get that close to the actual border itself. But at any point the Russian guns might start firing. So the Ukrainians are very hesitant to sort of allow anyone near there. What happens is that the people who cross are immediately loaded onto buses and delivered to Sumy, which is a few miles away, which is the nearest city. And we were kind of there as they were being ushered through this sort of process to weed out any potential Russian saboteurs. But, for a distance of maybe 10, 15 miles that they travelled from the Russian side to the Ukrainian side, it had taken them about 12 hours or longer because of the various checks they were having to go through. So we were kind of there at the reception centre, as they were going through these checks, there are constant air alarms in Sumy. It's under constant glide bomb attack. There was another one while we were there. Everyone had to rush down to the shelter. Sumy is a kind of a city where you might think that everything is normal, and then things quickly become, it feels like a frontline city in a flash, just like that. So it's a quite surreal place.
And I think a lot of people will be quite surprised that there are any border crossings still open at this point. So why has it been allowed for so long?
It's a good question. In terms of the Ukrainians are as perplexed as anyone as to why the Russians still allow people to get out this way. I mean, I guess there is a degree of kind of clemency and mercy towards elderly people, in particular, people with advanced stages of cancer, that sort of thing. But there were also, we saw young men and families as well who were making the crossing. So it is a total anomaly. It's a kind of weird place that within this absolutely brutal war is a kind of moment where there is, for some reason, some uneasy truce that allows people to escape. How long that will last, we don't know, because Kharkiv, which is the bordering region to Sumy, has been really in the thick of the action recently, and Russian troops have basically sort of advanced over the border and captured a couple of villages to divert Ukrainian troops away from the front lines. And Zelensky and others have warned that Sumy could be next, and they're building immense fortifications along the border. So if the Russians launch another prong of an attack there, the Ukrainian border guards told us that there's no way that they could keep this last window open.
Well, I was going to say, does it actually maybe act as a bit of a danger for Ukraine, having a place where it is possible to cross?
Well, as I said, they go through quite lengthy checks with everyone that comes there. You have the Ukrainian security services kind of vetting everyone. But the principle is that if they're a Ukrainian citizen, they might be from Crimea, but which has been occupied by Russia for 10 years. But they are a Ukrainian citizen within Ukraine's eyes, and they have a right to be in Ukraine. Anyone who is, there's proof that they were collaborators or anything like that can be picked up on the system, and if necessary, sort of go through the Ukrainian judicial process. But they're quite serious about conducting checks, as you might imagine, for people who have come from occupied territories through Russia back to Ukraine.